The question is, how do I get commercial properties when I'm just getting started in the commercial space? So this could be a scenario where you're just starting your business, or it could be a scenario where you're predominantly residential and now you're expanding the company into the commercial market. So the commercial market is extremely competitive. There's a lot of price pressure. You will give a lot of proposals that you will never win, and you will never win them for a million different reasons. But it's different than residential. In residential, your percentage, your close rate, your close percentage should be way higher than it's going to be in commercial. You have to essentially quote a ton of work in commercial to win a ton of work. There's just no way around it. Even the best companies, the best commercial sales guys, they're quoting a lot of work. And that's how it works. And there is a sales cycle to commercial that's far longer than residential. Now I'm going to talk about sales cycle in a different video. This video is solely about how to get started in commercial and sell. So I'm not going to give you every little trick in detail. That could be an entire course in and of itself. But let me give you some pointers. So as you drive down the road and you look around, you're going to see malls and you're going to see big commercial properties. Let's put names to them. AMC movie theater, Regal movie theater, Home Depot, Lowe's. You're going to see all of these freestanding stores. Chili's, the restaurant, owned by Brinker, Red Lobster. There's Olive Garden. You're going to see all kinds of, those are all freestanding buildings owned by big corporations. And then you're going to get into other parts of town where you see smaller stores. Maybe a Subway in a small town that's freestanding, or a McDonald's, usually freestanding everywhere and as a freestanding building. When I say freestanding, I'm referring to that building is a standalone building that is not a multi-tenant building where there's a tenant on either side of that property. So for example, a typical Subway in many markets in the US is within a multi-tenant building, and there is another business on the left and right of the Subway store. And in some small towns, or in other parts of town, you'll see Subway be a freestanding building. Same with Starbucks. Sometimes Starbucks is a freestanding building. Sometimes Starbucks is within a multi-tenant building. So there's all of these different types of properties, and they're controlled by different types of people. Property management or commercial, big corporations that manage their own property, or big corporations that have essentially hired national property management companies to find them vendors. There are plenty of commercial properties out there where you deal directly with either the manager of that specific property, meaning the guy that's running that business. So let's use Starbucks. And that Starbucks is not a good example other than to say that in Starbucks you have a manager that runs the store. I'm referring to that kind of a person. So in some cases you'll deal with the guy that runs the local store, whatever that store is, whatever that business is. And then in other cases, the guy that runs that local store, that local business, might be the owner of it. It could be the franchisee, or if you go into an office park, you could get into a scenario where there's a lot of freestanding buildings, and you go into the front door of one of those freestanding buildings, and the person, that company itself, maybe it's a medical company of some form, the owner of that business also owns the real estate, and so you deal directly with them. He's not using a property management company. There's just so many scenarios. So when I got started in commercial, I started in two places. I started in warehouses, and I started in basically commercial properties that were on office park, and they were predominantly freestanding buildings. And I just walked door to door, and I walked in, and it's not something I enjoyed at all. I didn't like it, but it worked. And I would literally walk in the front door, and I would ask if they have a company. And then eventually I figured out that I should ask, if you do have a company, when will you be asking for a bid? When will you put this out to bid? Or when is that contract up or that agreement up? A lot of times they don't know, but then you can ask for who should I contact and who should I talk to if you're speaking with the front desk. And clearly most of the time when you walk in the front door, they have no desire to talk to you, so you should ask for a business card. This is an effective approach, but you have to go see a lot of businesses. You got to essentially knock on a lot of doors. But the real point here is, so how do you get started? So if you imagine that you could bid a mall Or you could go to an office park and you could bid a freestanding building where the owner might also own the real estate. It's way easier to walk in the door and get that business than it is to get the mall. Or if you could figure out that in this part of town, a lot of the businesses there, office park businesses or whatever they might be, we're just using office parks in this example, a lot of the businesses in the office park, because they're freestanding buildings and not multi-tenant buildings, because multi-tenant buildings are most, in my experience, almost always managed by property management companies. That's why I designate multi-tenant versus freestanding. There's an absolute difference. And plenty of freestanding buildings are also managed by a property management company, but you're rarely ever going to walk into a suite in a multi-tenant building and find out that that guy in that suite is the guy that owns the building. It never happens. So you're going to deal with the property management company in that case. A lot of times you can call the sign, or at least to get your foot in the door and to start working the process and do your investigative work, you can, from the leasing sign, figure out where to start. That's usually the property management company. So jumping around a bit here, but in a multi-tenant building, oftentimes the leasing sign is where you start to track back and say, okay, who is the property management company in charge of these properties? Now, back to the freestanding example, it just so happens that's where I started, in both warehouses and within office buildings. And by walking into some of these freestanding buildings, we won an awful lot of the business. Now, a lot of the freestanding buildings turned out to be, like, let's use an example that a lot of us would know, John Deere, or John Deere acquired all of the Lesco stores a long time ago. Well, in my market, Lesco stores used to be a freestanding building. I could walk into Lesco. I used to have Estes. They were another chemical supplier. We used to maintain Estes. And so Estes was a scenario where we'd walk in and we maintained their property, but there were Estes stores all over. We just maintained their freestanding building, and that decision was made at that local store level. Lesco would be the same thing. They have a lot of freestanding buildings. Now, I never maintained Lesco, so I don't know if they made their maintenance decisions at the store level or if they made their decisions at the corporate level. I couldn't say, but the point is, that's a freestanding building, and I was able to just walk into those, and some percentage would be, oh yes, we need somebody. Some percentage would be, we don't need anybody, but we're really not that thrilled. Call us in 4 months. But the vast majority had no interest. And of that, I won some. So I'm finally circling now to how do you get started. You've got to have some references. You've got to have some examples you can point to. I remember early on, I kept getting the question, hey, give me some addresses. I want to see some of the properties you maintain. That was a real challenge in the beginning. So we won a number of properties in the beginning that we really severely underbid because we didn't know what we were doing. The only side benefit to that was that we at least had some clients now that we could point to. We had some references. We also started learning about the selling process, and we also started learning about maintaining of these bigger properties. So now I could talk the language when I spoke with a property management company or when I spoke with an HOA board. I knew how they thought and the questions they would ask and what was of importance to them. And I learned that by getting some properties. That's point number one. Finally, this far into the video, point number one is that you have to first just get some properties. So my opinion wouldn't be, don't look at the malls. Don't look at the giant corporations. Go get the little stuff. Just start small. I mean, even if I had some warehouses that paid $45 a week to cut, but that was commercial. That got me in. That made me start learning it. And I'd have another commercial property just down the street that paid $125 a week. And in this example, most of them just wanted it mowed. It was a pretty simple thing. They were warehouse district, industrial park type work. But that got me in the door. That got me into commercial. And then from there, it expanded into some HOAs. And then my first HOA, if I remember correctly, came from one of the freestanding buildings that we won. They recommended us to somebody they knew at the HOA. We ended up bidding against some other people and winning the HOA. We first had won a small office park building, just a freestanding building for a medical company. And that led to then a referral to a HOA. So now I understood HOAs, so then I could get some other HOAs. Then one time when a big condo association called, based on our website, we knew the language, we knew how to do the work, and then we won that. And it just sort of daisy-chained in a sense. It built up on itself. But the point was, what happened? I didn't start with I didn't start with a mall. I didn't start with something huge. I started with smaller stuff and grew. And that's important. So I would start with properties that you can go get and you can walk through. Then you can from there buy a mailing. Once you know your deal, once you know what you're doing, you know your language, then you can start buying a mailing list. You can watch the video where I talk about who are the people, what are the titles of the people you need to talk to. Well, now once you figure out what you're doing with some small properties, then you could go out and buy a mailing list and market to these people. There's a sell cycle to this. It takes time. You've got to work this. Marketing is really important in the commercial space. Few do it. But remember, one little tidbit, when you're marketing to a commercial company, you're marketing to a human being. You're not marketing to Home Depot or Starbucks. You're marketing to Jim at Starbucks store number 9604. You're marketing to Larry at the Home Depot on the west side of your town. And Larry goes home and has kids, and Jim goes home and he has a wife that's frustrated with how many hours he's putting into the store. And he's mad at the vendor that screwed up his parking lot when he restriped it. And he's fed up with the guy that works in the back of the warehouse that keeps screwing stuff up with the forklift. He has problems just like you. And on Saturday, he's going to go to his daughter's volleyball game. You're marketing to him. You're not marketing to Home Depot. You're not marketing Starbucks. That's very important to understand in this. And so as you're thinking about this, point number one, start with some smaller stuff. Point number two, once you know what you're doing, you can buy a mailing list, and now you start your marketing campaign to the purchasing manager, to the store manager, to the facility manager. I don't know who, but you're marketing to that person as an individual. You're building a relationship. This entire commercial business, growing a commercial business, all about relationships. I used to be a partner in a big commercial cleaning company. That entire business was built on relationships. Taking guys to games, taking people to sporting events, flying them to the trade show in Las Vegas and paying for it, and going with them, sponsoring their kids' soccer games and baseball games, and they're sponsoring their teams. It was all relationships. We built deep relationships, and we started with one property, built relationships. They would recommend us to others, or you'd go into using another Home Depot example, which I've never been in Home Depot, or I've never had any Home Depot clients. You win over the trust of the guy that's running your local Home Depot store, and then when his buddy in another market is fed up and done, he says, man, you should try the guys I have. You should talk to them. Just talk to them, because I don't have any problems anymore. And then you get the next store, and then you get the next store, and then eventually they recommend you to corporate office, and then the regional manager knows about you. That's how it works in commercial. Even in property management, that's how it works. You get in with a property management company, he lets you try a few properties, you do a bang up job, he gives you a few more. Before long, he knows that you eliminate all the headaches in his life. By the way, still have to give really good pricing because it's a very price sensitive business, the commercial market, but you earn his trust, and he starts giving you more and more and more. And then he knows another property management guy, and he tells them about you. And it grows, but it starts slow. But boy, if you really get in with the right property management companies, this business can explode quickly. They can give you tons and tons and tons of work. So my third point to think about in getting started is there a niche? What can you be an expert at? So in my cleaning business that I was a partner in, we were in a niche. There are a bazillion buildings in the world to clean of all different types. We chose one specific industry to clean buildings for, and we got out of everything else and only cleaned buildings for that industry, and we became the guys in that industry. And that's how we built a business all over the United States, is by being the experts in cleaning for that industry. Now, is there something you could be in? And that, for us, was plenty of business. You could build a huge, 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 huge company just being in that niche. So is there something that you could be the very best at in your market? You are the HOA guy. You are the restaurant guy. And I'm not saying that you should be either one of those two things, but just think about it. What could you be the best at? What is the thing that a lot of properties in your commercial market need? Is it some kind of specialized enhancement? Are there retention ponds? And it's often hard to find people to clean retention ponds. So you are the retention pond expert, which then opens the door for you to get into all kinds of other commercial properties. Are you the expert at power washing, something a little outside of what you do, but you're so good at it that that then opens the door for you to win other business. But you're an expert at power washing some certain type of building. I don't know what that is, but think about the concept of the niche. What is it that you could be considered the best at, that you have this giant market you want to sell to, and you could shrink it down and be it when it comes to that market? Again, it all takes a while to grow this, but then once you're considered the guy, then everybody calls you. Everybody says, oh, well, yeah, for me, my business is different. I need to talk to the guy that is the expert at power washing the front of hospitals. I can only deal with the guy that understands hospitals. And you're the guy that specializes in outdoor maintenance for medical facilities and all the security and concern that goes into that. So think about niching as your third way to make yourself stand out and break into the commercial market, because it's a massive market and you need some way to look different, and you need a portfolio of properties to present, and you need all these things to really start to blow up your business and build it. So think about those 3 points in terms of how you get started, and ignore a lot of the stuff that everybody else wants and everybody's competing for. Everybody wants the local McDonald's. Everybody wants the fancy property on the corner of some big street in your area. Everybody wants the mall. Everybody wants the fanciest HOA in the market. Everybody's competing for that. Where can you go that not everybody's competing, and start there? And eventually you gain the reputation that you win the fanciest stuff, but that's years down the road. So basically, shrink your market, shrink your goal in some sense, and figure out where you can start, dominate that, and build from that. So this is a long-term game. You are just trying to get a foothold so you can take over. Got to get your foothold. And so what's the smallest way you can get a foothold and get it fast?